Hello, and thank you for joining this webinar. I am Jennifer Park of the Office of the Chief Statistician at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. Ever wonder where federal statistics on race ethnicity come from? How federal statistics on race ethnicity are made? This webinar will describe how your federal statistical agencies work to keep measures of race ethnicity in the U.S. relevant, accurate, objective, and accessible. To accomplish this, we need the help of policymakers and, most importantly, you. Throughout this webinar, we will describe how we do the work that we do using some recent examples. We'll conclude describing how you can help us as we review our current measures of race ethnicity in the U.S. Keeping federal data on race ethnicity relevant, accurate, objective, and accessible requires the help of many. During the webinar, after my presentation providing this overview of the federal statistical system and the way we coordinate that system, you'll hear from Tracy Cook of the National Center for Health Statistics, the coordinator for the Federal Interagency Forum on Child and Family Statistics. Tracy will describe a recent publication of child statistics to respond to policy needs. After Tracy, we'll hear from Lauren Musu-Gillette of the National Center for Education Statistics, who will describe the approach her agency has taken to provide the most accurate federal statistics on race ethnicity of students. Following Lauren, Beverly Pratt of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget will describe our current review and possible revision to the federal standards for collecting and reporting data on race ethnicity. An important component of that presentation will be the ways in which the public, that means you, can participate in this process and help us provide the most relevant, accurate, objective, and accessible federal statistics to America. I'll sum up at the end with the main points we've discussed. Ever wonder where federal statistics come from? They are made by federal statistical programs. There are more than 127 such programs, and the majority of them are fairly small offices working on very specific, policy-relevant areas, like land use, child care, and tropical disease. 13 of these agencies are principal federal statistical agencies, agencies whose sole mission is to produce relevant, accurate, objective, and accessible statistics. Some of these agencies are quite large indeed, the largest being the U.S. Bureau of the Census. With all of those agencies, often working in very specific areas, how does the U.S. produce some of the best statistics in the world? We do it by working together. My office, the Office of the Chief Statistician, sets standards, evaluates budgets, and enforces information quality. The way that we set standards, identify resource priorities, and evaluate the quality of our statistics is through interagency collaboration. We convene federal interagency working groups to exchange best practices, identify needs, and spur improvements. The federal government has several of these interagency working groups that gather periodically to consult on particular matters. You will be hearing about 2 of these during this webinar. The first is a Federal Interagency Forum on Child and Family Statistics, which began over 20 years ago. In 1994, an interagency seminar was held to discuss ways to share knowledge about child and family statistics. An executive order established the forum formally. Tracy will tell you more about the Children's Forum during her presentation. OMB has been a strong supporter of the forum since its inception because the forum provides a way for federal statistical agencies to compare their practices, share their knowledge, collaborate, and identify efficiencies. The forum also provides a venue for OMB to communicate policy interests to statistical agencies to ensure that the statistics federal agencies produce remain relevant. Race ethnicity data are needed to inform planning for many federal programs. They are critical in making policy decisions regarding civil rights enforcement. They are necessary for legislative redistricting planning. They are used to promote equal employment opportunities and to assess differences in health and environmental risks. Race ethnicity data are so important to federal programs that OMB has a standard which describes how race ethnicity data should be collected and reported by federal agencies. By having a standard, data collected and reported by one federal agency are more comparable to race ethnicity data collected and reported by another federal agency. This kind of comparability makes our data more efficient. We can learn more when our datasets talk to one another. But standards require periodic review to make sure that they are still producing relevant, accurate, objective, and accessible data. Our society changes over time. People's interests and concerns change. Our nation grows increasingly diverse, and information needs continue to expand. So, OMB has begun its periodic review of its standard on race ethnicity data. Bev's presentation will describe the established process we use to make sure that we receive the best input from federal experts, the public, and policymakers before making a decision. We want to get it right, and we need you. Bev will also let you know how you can help by providing your own comments. So, let's get started.
I'm Tracy Cook, Public Health Analyst at the National Center for Health Statistics in Hyattsville, Maryland, and Forum Coordinator and Staff Director for the Federal Interagency Forum on Child and Family Statistics. This webinar segment will take a glance at highlights of the Forum's 2016 America's Children Brief Report, which focuses on selected key indicators of race and ethnicity, as well as current and projected demographics. Before turning to data findings, we'll take a look at how collaborative efforts of the Forum have benefited the federal system, and then briefly reflect on the Forum's background, mission, and activities. In a recent memo from the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, Administrator Shalansky recognizes the benefits of the interagency forums on child and family statistics and aging-related statistics, and acknowledges these efforts as models for federal collaboration. He notes, the federal government has substantially improved the collection and dissemination of aging and child-related statistics by adopting a comprehensive, common, federal-wide approach rather than relying on stovepipe releases of information by each office. The Children's Forum was formed in 1994 through the cooperative efforts of 6 agencies in OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and formally established in 1997 under executive order. Today, we are 23 agencies who work collectively to foster coordination, cooperation, and collaboration among federal agencies that produce or use statistical data related to America's children and families, and to improve consistency in the collection, reporting, and dissemination of these federal data. As a result of these efforts, the Forum's America's Children Report has become a standard-bearer for key indicators of well-being and a comprehensive, easy-to-understand picture of children and families in the U.S. Here you have a quick visual of the departments and agencies of the Forum. The Forum not only produces its flagship America's Children Report, but also engages in activities and produces other special publications. In 2015, the Forum completed a comprehensive review and inventory of early childhood social-emotional measures as part of a multi-year contract. Additionally, participating agencies of the Forum have collaborated to produce special publications, like the one-time Young Adult Special Issue produced in 2014, featuring key indicators on 18 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. All of these deliverables are archived on childstats.gov, the Forum website. Currently, the Forum is planning to add infographics to its slate of deliverables, giving data users yet another way to easily view and interpret data. The Forum alternates its annual release of a full report and brief report. The full report showcases 41 regular indicators in print and online. The brief highlights selected indicators based on Forum consensus. The Forum agreed that taking a closer look at key indicators by race and ethnicity in the 2016 brief would be particularly timely given several recent milestones, including the 30th anniversary of the Heckler Report in 2015 and the 30th anniversary of the HHS Office of Minority Health. Released on July 12th, the brief highlights 28 indicators across all 7 report domains, which are listed here. A downloadable PDF of the report is available on the Forum's website. Now, I just want to take a few minutes to spotlight some notable demographic findings and indicators. From the demographic background section of the report, we learn that racial and ethnic diversity has increased dramatically over the past 35 years, and these trends are projected to continue among children in the U.S. In 2015, Hispanic children represented 25% of U.S. children, and Black non-Hispanic children represented 14%. By 2050, only 39% of all U.S. children are projected to be white non-Hispanic. Let's look first at child poverty, as this indicator provides an important backdrop for other indicators in the brief report. Overall, child poverty rates in the U.S. vary considerably by race and Hispanic origin. This pattern is an important one to highlight given the links between poverty and other economic and social outcomes. In 2014, the most recent year of data available at the time of the report, the poverty rate was higher for Black non-Hispanic and Hispanic children than for white non-Hispanic children. Looking next at adolescent births, we note that adolescent birth rate is another important indicator of well-being. Childbirth during adolescence is often accompanied by long-term difficulties for both the mother and child. This includes higher risk of low birth weight and infant mortality, particularly for younger adolescent mothers, and a greater likelihood of growing up in homes with lower levels of emotional support and cognitive stimulation, as well as a lower likelihood of earning a high school diploma. Although adolescent birth rates for all racial and ethnic groups have generally been on a long-term decline for decades, birth rates continue to vary by race and ethnicity. By looking closely at health insurance coverage, we can see that health insurance is a major determinant of access to and utilization of health care. The likelihood that children have health insurance and the type of insurance vary by race and ethnicity. Data here show the decline in the overall percentage of children without health insurance coverage. And in 2014, Hispanic children were still more likely to be without coverage than non-Hispanic children. Looking at alcohol use by race and ethnicity can help us to better understand who is at greatest risk for negative consequences. Alcohol is the most common illicit substance used during adolescence. Binge drinking is defined here as 5 or more alcoholic beverages in a row, or during a single occasion in the previous 2 weeks. Heavy use of alcohol is associated with negative outcomes, such as problems in school and the workplace, being involved in fights, criminal activities, motor vehicle crashes, and other injuries resulting in death. Among 12th graders, long-term trends of reported binge drinking have declined among white non-Hispanics, Black non-Hispanics, and Hispanics. The brief also includes an indicator on mathematics and reading achievement. In this figure, we see that in 2015, the average mathematics scores for fourth grade non-Hispanic white, Black, and Asian or Pacific Islander students were all higher in 2015 than in 1990. This finding also held true for Hispanic students. The report further notes that mathematics and reading achievement test scores are good indicators of overall achievement in school. Differences in academic performance between groups of students, or achievement gaps, have long been documented for students from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. So, I've given you some background on the Children's Forum today and shared a few data highlights, but there's much more to see and learn on childstats.gov. More on current and prior reports, special publications, and project deliverables, up-to-date web tables, and general information on forum member agencies and committees. Hopefully, I've piqued your interest and you'll want to follow up. Here, you'll find the forum web address and my direct contact information. Thank you so much for your continued support and interest in the Children's Forum. I hope you'll stay in touch.
I am Lauren Massoud-Gillette, a statistician at the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES. During this webinar segment, I will discuss the current ways in which NCES collects racial and ethnic data. Then, I will provide examples from a few of our key reports that show some of the ways we present the data by race and ethnicity. These reports are widely used by researchers and policymakers interested in the progress of education in the United States. NCES collects data on 7 major racial and ethnic categories. The race and ethnicity groupings are designed to be mutually exclusive in all of our published materials. That is, there is no overlap in the individuals placed in any of these categories. For example, someone who reports as a white Hispanic would only be included and reported in the Hispanic group. Sometimes, groups are combined due to small sample sizes or to present time series data. For example, separate data on Pacific Islanders were not often collected prior to the early 2000s. Therefore, when we present long-term trends on certain educational outcomes, Asians and Pacific Islanders are combined into one group to reflect the fact that these groups were collected together in the older data. In addition, sample size issues or other limitations of the data may require that different categories be presented as a combined group. Recently, we've begun reporting some data on Asian and Hispanic subgroups from the American Community Survey due to interest in examining variability within these groups. NCES will continue to explore options for presenting better data by race and ethnicity to meet the needs of the public while maintaining high statistical standards. One of the primary NCES sources for data by race and ethnicity on a wide variety of education topics is the Digest of Education Statistics. This report contains over 600 tables, many with racial and ethnic breakouts. While a full PDF of the report is released every year, the website is the best resource for the most up-to-date versions of the tables. Here is an example of a digest table that shows student enrollment in public schools by race and ethnicity over time. You'll notice that the Asian and Pacific Islander categories are combined here in order to have a consistent time series with the older data. Data on students of 2 or more races were not collected in this data source until 2008, as shown by the missing data for this group in earlier years. These data highlight the growing diversity of our population as white students become a minority of the students enrolled in public school beginning in 2014. This digest table presents data on the percentage of children living in poverty for Hispanic subgroups. It also provides information on the breakouts by family structure for these subgroups. However, you'll notice that some of the data are suppressed due to small sample sizes. The Condition of Education is a congressionally mandated report that is provided to the White House and Congress every year. This report summarizes important developments and trends from early childhood through post-secondary education, as well as presents education-related data for the broader U.S. population. This figure from the Condition of Education shows the percentage of 25 to 29-year-olds with a bachelor's or higher degree by race and ethnicity. You'll notice that the Asian and Pacific Islander groups are also combined here in order to show the trend back to 1995. Generally, all groups are making gains, but attainment for the combined Asian and Pacific Islander group remains consistently higher than attainment for other racial and ethnic groups. The attainment for American Indian and Alaska Natives shows more variability over time than that for most other groups. This is due in part to the small sample sizes for this group, leading to a larger margin of error in the estimates. In this figure, showing the 2014 percentage distribution of undergraduate enrollment by race and ethnicity, you'll notice that the Asian and Pacific Islander groups are presented separately for this more recent data collection. We see here that there is quite a bit of variability by race and ethnicity in the types of institutions in which students enroll. Our annual report, Indicators of School Crime and Safety, contains 23 indicators covering a wide range of topics related to school crime and safety in the United States. Many of these indicators present differences by students' race and ethnicity. This figure from the Indicators of School Crime and Safety report shows that a greater percentage of American Indian and Alaska Native students reported that they were threatened or injured with a weapon compared to students of other racial and ethnic groups. The note on the Pacific Islander bar indicates that data for this group should be interpreted with caution due to larger amounts of error, likely due to a small sample size. Finally, the report on status and trends in the education of racial and ethnic groups is the major publication where NCES reports educational data for students of different races and ethnicities. To the extent possible, this report attempts to give a more nuanced picture of differences by race and ethnicity by presenting this data in combination with other demographic characteristics, such as gender or age. Additionally, this report presents data on Hispanic and Asian subgroups for a number of the indicators. Here is a good example of a more complex analysis where data are split by both race and ethnicity as well as poverty status. We can see there is more variability by race and ethnicity in the types of care arrangements for children from poor families than those from non-poor families. The data presented in this figure are broken out by both race and ethnicity and gender. While the figure shows that there is a gender gap in the percentage of science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, degrees awarded across all groups, this gap is larger for some racial and ethnic groups compared to others. This figure shows the percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled in college for Asian subgroups. You can see a lot of variability across the subgroups, showing that it's important to consider differences within racial and ethnic groups as well as between them. Due to limitations of sample sizes, this level of detail is only available from a very limited number of federal surveys. I've presented information on how NCES currently classifies racial and ethnic groups and provided examples from some of our major reports. All of our reports are available on the NCES website. Accurately measuring data by race and ethnicity is an important component of the work that NCES does. Practitioners and policymakers need to know how different students are performing in order to make informed decisions about the best ways to support education for our nation's students. NCES continues to address challenges posed by changing demographics and evolving policy needs with respect to race and ethnicity data, while at the same time ensuring that survey procedures and analytic designs meet high statistical standards.
Thank you for joining this presentation by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget and its Interagency Working Group for Research on Race and Ethnicity. My name is Beverly Pratt, and I work with the Statistical and Science Policy Office of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. The purpose of this presentation is to further describe Federal Register notice issued by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget regarding the federal standards for maintaining, collecting, and presenting federal data on race and ethnicity. Before I go into the background and review process of the Federal Register notice, including the now 4 areas under current review, allow me to review the action and summary of the Federal Register notice in discussion. The Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, published a Federal Register notice. This Federal Register notice signaled a request for public comment regarding proposals received from the Federal Interagency Working Group for Research on Race and Ethnicity for revisions to OMB's Standards for Maintaining, Collecting, and Presenting Data on Race and Ethnicity from 1997. That being said, I will now discuss the historical context of and review process for the Federal Register notice. This slide provides a brief historical context for the current Federal Register notice under discussion. For example, in 1977, OMB published its directive, Race and Ethnic Standards for Federal Statistics and Administrative Reporting. Doing so put into effect minimum standard categories for the collection and presentation of data on race and ethnicity for use by all federal agencies. In 1994, OMB published a note of proposed review and possible revision requesting comments on the adequacy of the then current categories. During this time, OMB established an interagency committee for the review of the racial and ethnic standards, whose members represented the many and diverse federal needs for racial and ethnic data, including statutory requirements for such data. In 1997, OMB published revisions to the standards for the classification of federal data on race and ethnicity, which stemmed from the recommendations of the Interagency Committee for the Review of Race and Ethnic Standards. More recently, in 2014, OMB formed the IWG for Research on Race and Ethnicity to exchange research findings, identify implementation issues, and collaborate on a shared research agenda to improve federal data on race and ethnicity. The IWG comprises representatives from 10 cabinet departments and 3 other agencies engaged in the collection or use of federal race and ethnicity data. And, most recently, on September 30th, 2016, OMB published a note to signal review and possible limited revision of the 1997 standards within 4 specific areas. 1. The use of separate questions versus a combined question to measure race and ethnicity in question phrasing. 2. The classification of a Middle Eastern and North African group in distinct reporting category. 3. The description of intended use of minimum reporting categories. And 4. The salience of terminology used for race and ethnicity classifications and other language in the standard. In total, September 2016's Federal Register notice received thousands of public comments during its 30-day comment period. Themes of these comments will be discussed later on in this presentation. Interestingly, however, approximately 1,240 comments related to additional minimum reporting categories for Asian detailed groups and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander detailed groups. Therefore, the now 4 areas under current review for Federal Register notice include 1. Questionnaire format and non-response. 2. The classification of a Middle Eastern and North African race or ethnicity. 3. Additional minimum reporting categories for American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white groups. 4. Relevance of terminology. Now let's go into each of these 4 areas under review, one by one. I will start first by discussing content in Federal Register notice relating to the review and possible limited revision of the traditional separate questions approach as compared to a potential combined question approach. The IWG is examining the current use of the 2 separate questions versus a combined question to measure race and ethnicity, and also recent empirical research on comparing the different question format alternatives. The current 1997 OMB standards state, quote, self-reporting or self-identification using 2 separate questions is the preferred method for collecting data on race and ethnicity. In situations where self-reporting is not practical or feasible, the combined format may be used, end quote. Captured on this slide is the current separate questions format. And captured on this slide is the current combined question format. The persistent problem and reason for reviewing the standards is that the concepts of race and ethnicity are fluid. Individuals may be from multiple different racial groups, but identify and present themselves as only 1 or 2 races. For some people, ethnicity is a distinct concept that is separate from race, and for others, race and ethnicity are synonymous. In data collection, this conceptual difference in understanding featuring separate questions for ethnicity and for race can result in large amounts of missing data and non-response for either the race question or the ethnicity question. Particularly, in some surveys, we find that many Hispanics do not provide responses to the race question or respond by reporting again that they are Hispanic. In these cases, race is imputed. During the 30-day comment period from September 30th Federal Register notice, question format received approximately 94 comments covering 4 themes. The first theme was combined question support, receiving about 67 comments. These comments noted that the combined question format represents an equitable approach for obtaining data on all racial and ethnic groups. The second theme was accuracy and data concerns, receiving about 11 comments. These comments did not support either the combined question format or the 2 separate questions format. Rather, commenters expressed support for whichever format could increase the response and participation of their constituency. The third theme was combined question non-support, receiving about 10 comments. These comments did not support the combined question format. Finally, the fourth theme was civil rights, divisive and confusing categories, receiving about 6 comments. These remaining comments touched on issues of civil rights enforcement and the confusing and general divisive nature of categories. At this point, the question format subgroup will continue its review of current federal agency practices to determine whether or how a revised question format might improve the collection, tabulation, and utility of race ethnicity statistics for federal programs and policies. In doing so, the question format subgroup has 4 areas of request for public comment. First, what factors should be considered when evaluating anticipated information quality? Should both magnitude and scope, that is, the majority of collections, be considered? Should magnitude of the improved information outweigh the scope of the improved change, or vice versa? What amount of improvement would be considered meaningful? How should an improvement in data quality in some federal data systems be balanced against decreased data quality in other systems? Second, what factors should be considered when evaluating anticipated feasibility? Should burden to local, state, and federal agencies be considered? What amount of costs spent to augment systems and labor hours to implement changes would caution against implementing a change? How should potential lags in data delivery be weighed? Third, what factors should be considered when evaluating anticipated cost of implementing a change? Should costs be weighed differently when experienced at a local, state, or federal level? How should costs of improving or failing to improve information quality be considered? Fourth, when considering information quality, feasibility, and cost, how should benefits and costs be weighed? In which cases would information quality outweigh feasibility and cost concerns? In which cases would feasibility and cost concerns outweigh information quality? Now I will be discussing content in Federal Register notice relating to the review and possible limited revision of a potential Middle Eastern or North African classification and category. The 1997 standards delineate the aggregate reporting category of white as including people who have origins in, quote, any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa, end quote. During the periodic review of the standards leading up to the 1997 publication, OMB's Interagency Committee for the Review of Racial and Ethnic Standards did consider the addition of a distinct minimum reporting category for respondents identifying as Arabs or Middle Easterners. However, the committee decided to not issue a definition or an additional minimum reporting category for this group, as agreement could not be reached among public stakeholders on the intended measurement concept and a definition for this category. Instead, OMB did encourage further research to be done in order to determine the best way to improve data for this population group. The MENA subgroup continues to research a Middle Eastern or North African, or MENA, minimum reporting category with input from multiple stakeholders. This is largely based on research and stakeholder outreach undertaken by the U.S. Census Bureau. In doing so, the MENA subgroup is looking at a classification of a Middle Eastern or North African category. If agreement upon the definition for MENA can be reached, with or without the requirement of an additional separate new minimum aggregate reporting category distinct from white, OMB would need to revise the current standards to clarify the classification and tabulation instructions. During the 30-day comment period from the September 30th Federal Register notice, MENA received thousands of comments covering 5 themes. The first theme was MENA as a racially diverse ethnicity, receiving approximately 1,042 comments. These comments advise that people from the MENA region identify with many racial backgrounds, but no designation currently exists for them, and they remain undercounted and underrepresented. The second theme was disagreement with classification of MENA as white, receiving 19 comments. These comments took issue with the current OMB standards classifying people of Middle Eastern or North African descent as white. The third theme was classification of countries or ethnic groups as MENA, receiving approximately 1,347 comments. These comments concerned the specific countries or ethnicities that should be classified as MENA. The fourth theme was support for adding MENA minimum reporting category, receiving approximately 2,235 comments. Almost all comments received regarding this review area express support for an additional minimum reporting category for this population, providing personal and societal reasons for their support. Finally, the fifth theme was non-support for adding a MENA minimum reporting category, receiving 38 comments. These comments did not support revising the minimum standards to require an additional minimum reporting category for MENA. At this point, the MENA subgroup proposes that a Middle Eastern or North African classification is added to the standards. The classification for the Middle Eastern and North African population should be geographically based. The MENA classification should be defined as, quote, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of the Middle East and North Africa. This includes, for example, Lebanese, Iranian, Egyptian, Syrian, Moroccan, Israeli, Algerian, Iraqi, and Kurdish, end quote. In doing so, the MENA subgroup has 4 areas of request for public comment. First, if MENA were collected as a separate reporting category, assuming that separate race and ethnicity questions continue to be the standard, should MENA be considered an ethnicity or a race? Second, outreach conducted with the Israeli American Council and Jewish American organizations indicates that persons of Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, and Sephardi origin do not wish to be included in the MENA category, as it directly identifies the person as Jewish. Moreover, experts at the U.S. Census Bureau's 2015 Forum on Ethnic Groups from the Middle East and North Africa expressed that those who identify as Assyrian, Chaldean, Coptic, or Druze would like to be included in the MENA category. Therefore, the MENA subgroup asks for public comment regarding the following question: which, if any, specific ethno-religious group should be included in a MENA classification? Please note, the IWG will ensure that any proposed Middle Eastern or North African classification or category that could be constructed would be done so in a manner that does not violate Public Law 94-521, which states, in part, quote, notwithstanding any other provision of this title, no person shall be compelled to disclose information relative to his religious beliefs or to membership in a religious body, end quote. Third, the subgroup has also observed from initial feedback that the definition of MENA may be misunderstood to include only persons who are foreign-born. Our intention is that a MENA category, should it be adopted, would include persons of MENA origins, regardless of country of birth. We are interested in receiving feedback as how to best communicate this to respondents. Fourth, what is the estimated cost and public burden associated with requiring an additional reporting category for MENA across federal information collections? Would a separate reporting category allow reporting of statistically reliable estimates? Would the size of the MENA group present confidentiality or privacy concerns? How should the anticipated improvement in information quality be weighed against anticipated feasibility and cost if the additional reporting category were encouraged, if it were required? Now I will be discussing content in Federal Register Notice regarding additional minimum reporting categories for American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white groups. The 1997 standards provide a minimum set of racial and ethnic categories for use when federal agencies are collecting and presenting such information for statistical, administrative, or compliance purposes. The minimum set of racial and ethnic categories include American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white. While the 1997 standards provide these categories, they do not prohibit the collection and presentation of additional detailed categories, as long as those additional detailed categories can be totaled into the minimum set of categories for comparison purposes. The current standards utilize the following description regarding the intended use of minimum reporting categories. Quote, "In no case shall the provisions of the standards be construed to limit the collection of data to the categories described above. The collection of greater detail is encouraged," end quote, thereby encouraging federal agencies within the federal statistical system to collect detailed data. However, it has become clear that the 1997 description of the intended use of the aforementioned minimum reporting categories can be misunderstood, leading people to believe that they are the only acceptable reporting categories. Therefore, the subgroup is examining the language used in the 1997 standards in order to improve the understanding of the use of the minimum reporting categories. During the 30-day comment period from the September 30th Federal Register notice, this topic received comments covering 5 themes. The first theme, receiving 1,274 comments, regarded collecting more than the minimum reporting categories. Such comments expressed support for the collection of detailed race and ethnicity data by agencies beyond the minimum reporting categories. The second theme, receiving 7 comments, regarded changing the minimum reporting categories. These comments expressed support for a requirement to collect detailed race and ethnicity data beyond the minimum reporting categories. The third theme, receiving 9 comments, regarded creating a uniform item for detailed collection. These comments express support for a universal race and ethnicity question and set of response options for collecting detailed race and ethnicity data as a solution to the confusion about minimum response options. The fourth theme, receiving 2 comments, regarded not changing the minimum reporting category standards. These comments indicated that OMB should not change the existing standards. The fifth theme, receiving 6 comments, regarded reporting as many categories as possible. Such comments expressed disapproval of rolling categories into all other races in reporting data and advocated for American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander categories be reported whenever collected. At this point, the additional minimum reporting categories subgroup proposes that OMB issue specific guidelines for the collection of detailed race and ethnicity data for collections that are self-reported. In doing so, the subgroup has 10 areas of request for public comment. First, if issuing specific guidelines for the collection of detailed American Indian or Alaska Native race and ethnicity data, should OMB adopt the 2015 National Content Test or NCT method, which includes separately Navajo Nation, Blackfeet Tribe, Mayan, Aztec, Native Village of Barrow Inupiat Traditional Government, and Nome Eskimo Community. If not, how should OMB select the detailed race and ethnicity categories? Second, if issuing specific guidelines for the collection of detailed Asian race and ethnicity data, should OMB adopt the 2010 decennial census and NCT format, which includes separately Chinese, Filipino, Asian Indian, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and an other Asian category? If not, how should OMB select the detailed Asian race and ethnicity categories? Third, if issuing specific guidelines for the collection of detailed Black or African American race and ethnicity data, should OMB adopt the NCT format, which includes separately African American, Jamaican, Haitian, Nigerian, Ethiopian, and Somali? If not, how should OMB select the detailed race and ethnicity categories? Fourth, if issuing specific guidelines for the collection of detailed Hispanic or Latino race and ethnicity data, should OMB adopt the NCT format, which includes separately Mexican or Mexican American, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Salvadoran, Dominican, and Colombian? If not, how should OMB select the detailed race and ethnicity categories? Fifth, if issuing specific guidelines for the collection of detailed Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islanders race and ethnicity data, should OMB adopt the 2010 decennial census format, which includes separately Native Hawaiian, Chamorro, Samoan, and an other Pacific Islander category? Should it use the NCT format, which includes separately Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Chamorro, Tongan, Fijian, and Marshallese? If neither of these, how should OMB select the detailed Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander race and ethnicity categories? Sixth, if issuing specific guidelines for the collection of detailed white race and ethnicity data, should OMB adopt the NCT format, which includes separately German, Irish, English, Italian, Polish, and French? If not, how should OMB select the detailed race and ethnicity categories? Please note, these are the examples used when MENA was included in the NCT questionnaires. When MENA was not included in the NCT questionnaires, the examples are as follows: German, Irish, English, Italian, Lebanese, and Egyptian. Seventh, what burden and cost would a federal requirement to collect detailed race and ethnicity data place on federal agencies, state and local agencies, private sector entities, and the public? How should this burden and cost be weighed against any anticipated improvement in information quality? Eighth, should federal agencies be required to collect detailed race and ethnicity data even when such data could not be responsibly reported due to statistical reliability and confidentiality concerns? If so, in which cases? What factors should be considered? Ninth, if OMB were to strongly encourage, but not require, collection of detailed race and ethnicity data by federal agencies, how likely are federal agencies to adopt collection of detailed race and ethnicity data? 10th, if OMB were to strongly encourage, but not require, collection of detailed race and ethnicity data by federal agencies, what criteria should be used to encourage and evaluate conformance with such guidance? Now I will be discussing content in Federal Register Notice relating to the review and possible limited revision regarding certain terminologies used within the 1997 standards. Because terminology changes over time, the terminology subgroup reviewed the 1997 standards and decided to focus on certain areas for possible changes, including 1. Presentations of and terms used for the detailed race and ethnicity groups, such as the current designation of a principal minority race. 2. The wording of instructions for race and ethnicity items. And 3. The race and ethnicity terms used in items collecting federal data. In addition, the subgroup investigated clarifications of the current race-ethnicity group classifications. During the 30-day comment period from September 30th's Federal Register Notice, terminology received comments covering 5 themes. The first theme, receiving 14 comments, was the use of terms race or origin, race or ethnicity, or categories. Such comments voiced uncertainty regarding the intended definitions of the terms race and ethnicity, disagreed with the current usage of one of these terms, or presented an understanding of these terms that is not consistent with their intended conceptualization as socio-political constructions, rather than based on biology, as ascribed in the 1997 revision to the standards. The second theme, receiving 8 comments, was related to the need versus no need to change terminology. The third theme, receiving 24 comments, related to discontinuing the use of term principal minority race. The fourth theme, receiving 6 comments, was related to the use of the term multiracial in reporting. Finally, the fifth theme, receiving 2 comments, related to categorizing race ethnicity by geographic region. At this point, the terminology subgroup has 6 initial proposals. First, the subgroup proposes no changes be made to the current standards to specifically incorporate the following geographic locations into any existing race or ethnicity category: Australian, including the original peoples of Australia, the Aborigines; Brazilian, Cape Verdean, New Zealander, and Papua New Guinean. Second, based on analyses to date, the subgroup proposes more research and public input to be conducted to enable a fulsome consideration of adding more specific South or Central American subgroups to the current description of the American Indian or Alaska Native category. Third, the subgroup proposes that the duplicate category of Cuban be deleted so that the listing is presented according to population size. The subgroup also considered whether the current ordering of the classification list be updated to reflect current population size. As a next step, the subgroup will apply this rationale to the classification listing and determine the magnitude and benefit of any resulting changes. The results of this analysis will be shared with the public. Fourth, the subgroup proposes that the terms Negro and Far East be removed from the current standards. Fifth, the subgroup also proposes that race-ethnicity coding procedures be documented and publicly available. And finally, sixth, the subgroup proposes clarifying the standards to indicate the classification is not intended to be genetically based, nor based on skin color. Rather, the goal of the standards is to provide guidelines for the federal measurement of race-ethnicity as a social construct, and therefore to inform public policy decisions. In doing so, the subgroup has one area of request for public comment. Should Hispanic or Latino be among the groups considered among principal minorities? Would alternative terms be more salient? For example, principal minority race/ethnicity? Hispanic or Latino usually is considered an ethnicity, while minority is usually used when referencing race. Changing principal minority race to principal minority race/ethnicity supports the changing demographics of the U.S. population. We are almost to the end of our presentation. In order to close, let's talk about next steps. The Interagency Working Group for Research on Race and Ethnicity continues to deliberate. To be clear, the Interagency Working Group has made no recommendations to OMB at this time, and OMB has made no decisions regarding any of the areas under current review. Upon the posting of Federal Register notice, it will have a 60-day comment period. We encourage any comments and/or questions to be emailed to race-ethnicity@omb.eop.gov and/or to be posted on the Federal Register Notices link on regulations.gov. Then, the IWG will review the comments received via these processes and will prepare recommendations to OMB. In doing so, those recommendations will be made available to the public. Thank you, sincerely, for participating in our presentation, and we look forward to hearing back from you through these designated processes.
Hello, I am Jennifer Park of the Office of the U.S. Chief Statistician in the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, or OMB for short. If you have listened to the other presentations featured in this webinar, this last presentation will recap the most important information we've shared. If you are viewing this presentation alone, that's okay too. This webinar described how federal agencies keep statistics on race, ethnicity relevant, accurate, objective, and accessible. We described how OMB coordinates a decentralized federal statistical system by facilitating interagency collaboration. We also described how these agencies work together to identify data gaps and improve the quality of statistics. We also described the ways in which federal agencies continue to evaluate and improve the way they produce race-ethnicity data so that the public can access the best data the federal government can provide. Then, we described our current standards for the collection and reporting of race-ethnicity data for federal agencies. We described how we used our established process to begin a periodic review of the current standard to evaluate the functioning of the standards and identify areas for possible improvement which could lead to improved information quality. That interagency working group has now prepared an interim report to OMB on its findings, drawing from prior public comment, federal agency experience, and research to date. OMB is asking for public comment on that report, and that means you. The Interagency Working Group has identified 4 areas for review and possible revision to the current standard. 1. Question format and non-response. 2. The classification of a Middle Eastern or North African race ethnicity. 3. Additional minimum reporting categories for American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white groups. And 4. Relevance of terminology. The Interagency Working Group prepared an interim report, but has not yet issued any recommendations, and OMB has not made any decisions at this time. OMB will post the interim report in the Federal Register during 2017. The public will have 60 days to send in their comments. Electronic submissions are best. You can look for the notice on www.regulations.gov. The Federal Register notice will provide instructions about how to send comments. The Interagency Working Group will review the comments received and prepare recommendations to OMB. Those recommendations will be made available to the public. Remember, we need you to help keep federal statistics on race ethnicity relevant and accurate. Thank you for your help.